We're going to talk about something pretty incredible today, a single, powerful idea. An idea that came from a guy who, believe it or not, wasn't even a huge fan of being a sailor. And yet, this one idea would go on to reshape entire empires and literally draw the map of the 20th century.
I know, it sounds like something out of a novel, right? But this is totally real. We're talking about a single book, a book about history and strategy that basically became the go-to playbook for anyone who wanted global power. We're talking presidents, emperors, admirals, you name it, they all read it and they all acted on it.
So the book was called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And it just landed at the perfect moment. Think about it. The old world of wooden ships and sails was fading out, and this new era of steam and steel was just kicking in. Nations were scrambling, looking for a new set of rules, a new playbook. And this guy, Alfred Thayer Mahan, well, he was about to hand it to them on a silver platter.
All right, so who was this guy? The man behind this, world-changing theory? Well, his story, it's probably not what you're expecting.
Okay, so here's the crazy part about Alfred Thayer Mahan, the great irony. You'd think he'd be this swashbuckling admiral, right? A guy who lived for the salt spray and the open ocean? Nope, not at all. He was a total bookworm, a scholarly officer who was way more at home in a library than on the bridge of a warship. His real calling wasn't sailing the seas, but studying them from dry land.
And that's where the story takes a turn. See, this brand new Naval War College in Rhode Island needed someone to teach naval history and tactics. And who do they call? Mahan. It was there, while he was digging through books and prepping his lectures, that it all clicked. He started piecing together centuries of history into this single, powerful, and, as it turns out, world-altering theory.
So, what was this big idea, this revolutionary concept? Let's get into it. Let's decode what he meant by sea power.
See, for Mahan, sea power wasn't just, having a bunch of cool battleships. No, it was a whole system. It was about using the sea to get rich in peacetime through trade, and then in wartime being able to absolutely dominate the oceans, to blockade your enemies, protect your own shipping lands, basically to have total control of the seas. That was the goal.
And he said, this kind of power doesn't just happen by accident. Nope, he laid out 6 key ingredients. You needed the right geographical position, the right kind of coastline, enough territory, a large enough population, even the right national character and type of government. It was this big, all-encompassing idea that tied together a country's economy, its culture, and its military.
And his focus on geography? Man, it was incredibly ahead of its time. He looked at the United States, sitting there between 2 massive oceans, and saw that as both a huge advantage and a huge problem. So he argued, really forcefully, that a canal, something like the future Panama Canal, was an absolute game changer. It was the only way to connect the Atlantic and Pacific fleets and really unlock America's potential as a true global power.
Okay, and this brings us to maybe his most important strategic idea. Back then, the popular strategy, especially for weaker navies, was something called guerre de course, basically commerce raiding. You'd send your ships to pick off enemy merchant vessels one by one. Mahan thought this was a dangerous delusion. He said, forget that. The only way to truly win at sea is to build a massive fleet, find the enemy's main fleet, and crush it in one big, decisive battle. Don't go for a death by 1,000 cuts, go for the knockout punch.
So Mahan puts his theory out there in a book, and the world listened. Oh boy, did they listen. Let's take a look at the incredible real-world impact this book had, and we'll start right here in the United States.
The change was just stunning. It was night and day. Before Mahan's book, the U.S. Navy was basically a joke, a coastal defense force with a bunch of old rusty shits. But his book gave the big Navy guys, the politicians and officers who wanted America to be a major player, all the arguments they needed. Suddenly, the whole mission of the Navy changed. It wasn't about defense anymore. It was about dominance.
And you know who was the #1 fan of this new vision? Theodore Roosevelt. He absolutely ate it up. As Assistant Secretary of the Navy and later as President, Teddy Roosevelt didn't just read Mahan's book, it became his Bible, his policy guide. He was 100% convinced that America's destiny was tied directly to how strong its Navy was.
And this just shows you what happened next. The theory became steel. It's that simple. In less than 20 years, the U.S. Navy went from being basically nothing to one of the most powerful fleets on the entire planet. And they capped it all off by sending this great white fleet on a tour around the world, which is basically America's way of saying, hey everyone, we've arrived.
But here's the thing. The book's influence didn't just stop in America. Not even close. What happened when it got to Europe? Well, that was even more explosive. It basically lit the fuse on a global naval arms race.
Get this. That's a quote from the leader of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II. He said he was devouring the book, not just reading it. And he didn't stop there. He ordered a copy put on every single ship in the German Navy. For him, Mahan's book was the roadmap, the blueprint for Germany to finally challenge the top dog on the seas, Great Britain.
And the Kaiser's top admiral, a guy named von Tirpitz, he used Mahan's arguments as his secret weapon. Whenever he had to fight for more money for the Navy back home, he'd just quote Mahan. He'd say, look, if Germany wants to be a real world power, if we want colonies and global trade, we need a massive fleet. Think about that. He was using an American's theory to sell the German people on a direct challenge to the British Empire.
So let's just let that sink in for a second. One book, written by a bookish American naval officer who didn't even like being at sea. And it helps light the fuse on the massive naval arms race between Britain and Germany, an arms race that was a major factor in pushing all of Europe towards the First World War. I mean, you rarely see the power of a single idea laid out so clearly. Okay, so Mahan's ideas pretty much ran the world for a good 50 years. But what about now? What's his legacy in the 21st century? Let's take a look.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? I mean, Mahan was writing about steamships and cannons. We live in a world of satellites, drones, and cyber warfare. So, does any of us stuff still apply?
Well, the tools of the trade have definitely changed, that's for sure. The battleship, that was the king of the sea in Mahan's day. Now, it's been replaced by the aircraft carrier, the nuclear submarine. And the idea of commanding the sea isn't just about the water anymore. Now you have to think about space, about the internet, the whole shebang.
And yeah, we have to be honest about his blind spots. He was a man of his time, right? He couldn't have possibly predicted how the submarine would totally change the game, making giant surface ships incredibly vulnerable from below. And he definitely didn't see air power coming, how planes would completely rewrite the rules of war at sea from above.
But, and this is really the most important part, even with those blind spots, his central idea is still rock solid. That fundamental connection between a country's economy, its dependence on shipping things all over the world, and the naval power you need to protect all of that, that's just as true today as it was in 1890. I mean, think about it. Over 90% of all global trade still moves by ship.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. Mahan gave the world a definition of sea power that worked for his time. I guess the challenge for us, for our generation, is to figure out what it means now. In an age of drones and data and instant global communication, what does it really mean to control the seas? That question is more important now than ever.